You better watch out because you haven't heard of me before. I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to surprise everybody else out there.
These videos are satiric reviews. You don't have to agree, but don't bitch about it.
You know, there's usually a way to go about these things.
I know.
I mean, usually someone starts the review, and then somebody cuts them off.
Yeah.
They start bickering, and then they wind up reviewing whatever it was that they were going to review and act like they didn't want to do that to begin with.
Yep.
Let's not do that.
Agreed. So, we're gonna shoot then?
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking more of a worked shoot kind of an angle.
I should have seen that coming from a guy named Vince.
Brian Zane
did the unimaginable. He refused to follow the script.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Zane from Wrestling with Regret.
And I, of course, am the social injustice warrior, Infuso. And we are all humbly gathered here today to talk about a man who may not go down in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, sorry Fozzie, but will undoubtedly go down in the Wrestling Hall of Fame.
So that being said, let's break the walls down. Too cheesy?
Stupid idiot. Brian, before we go any further, I think we should tread lightly. Rumor has it that there's a famous scarf-wearing rock star / wrestler who could be watching. And well, we don't want to make it to any lists now, do we? Chris Jericho began his career on a weird foot as he was asked to perform as Cowboy Chris. And what is it with wrestling's fascination for cowboys? It never works!
V, are you forgetting? The future Ayatollah of rock and roll worked in Canada for the first 2 years of his career, teaming with Lance Storm after they trained together at the Hart Brothers School of Wrestling.
This period of time is important because it is the most charismatic Lance Storm would ever be.
V, are you forgetting?
Ryan, some things are better left forgotten.
Jericho began wrestling as Leon de Oro, or Golden Lion for our English-speaking viewers. His name actually came as a result of a fan vote on a Mexican TV show where the fans got to choose his name. The other two choices? He-Man and Chris Power.
Come on, baby!
Well, I guess it could have been worse. At least someone didn't want to call him Baron Von Ruthless or Frost McFang.
Yeah, it could have been. Can you imagine a fan vote being used to determine a wrestler's name today?
Alright fans, what will we name this brand new star? His fate lies in your hands. Your choices are Cuck Lesnar, Soy Boy, and the Gay Fairy.
Hang on. Who submitted these names?
It's me! It was me all along!
Speaking of Mexico, Jericho mentions in his first book how one time he had a gun pulled on him, then he was robbed and left stranded in the middle of nowhere. Screw that. If I even saw a gun on somebody, even if he wasn't looking at me, I would leave the territory immediately.
See, now that's the difference between you and I, Brian. I have a willingness to die.
You get a little dark on this channel, don't you?
This is me tame.
Noted.
Jericho also spent some time working for WAR. That's W-A-R.
Ooh, war. What's that stand for? Like Wrestling and Rage, or Warriors and Rampage, or something like...
Wrestling and Romance.
Oh, English, you so crazy.
That was that old Japanese promotion that ran as half wrestling, half soap opera. So it's like 90% soap opera.
The numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster.
A brief tenure there would be followed by a short stay in ECW, which is Jericho's first big break in the States. He was TV champion and was billed as the last survivor of the dungeon, but beyond that, there's not really a lot to talk about here. His ECW run wasn't exactly setting the wrestling world on fire.
Jericho would then head over to WCW.
And now it's time to talk about Japan again.
Already? We're only like a paragraph off of it.
You see, in January of '97, after his debut in WCW, where he was once again not setting the world on fire, he was picked to play Super Liger, a clone of an eventual rival to Jushin Liger in a New Japan talent exchange.
See, now the problem is Jericho never really wrestled in a full body suit before, and he performed horribly in it. Which is the expected outcome when you can't see where you're going and can't move around comfortably. That'll do it.
One bad match was all it took for the gimmick to be scrapped entirely. Now, Chris has said that he hates that match, but really, it's all about perspective. For example, I was a wrestler once and I sucked. If I had a match that looked like that, I would never shut up about how good I was in there.
I hear that.
Oh, you used to wrestle too?
Hey, I want to just mention right now, I'm so great I could sit here and kick Joe Della's ass. I could kick Joe Della's ass and still do commentary at the same damn time.
Let's move on.
Jericho hated his time as a babyface, and after excessive begging and irritating all the right people, they caved and the chicken shit sniveling heel was born.
Ralphus and myself would like to welcome you to Monday Night Jericho.
You know, a lot of people, and I myself am guilty of this, talk more about Ralphus and how he was the greatest security guard of all time, because obviously he was. But not enough people talk about how Jericho gave Danny McBride his first start.
It's funny how later tag team partner Christian would actually go on to use that same exact gimmick, and they'd both perform it to perfection.
Jericho would go on tangents, tearing down his opponents while also mispronouncing their names. Stinko Malenko, Tony Schiavone, JoJo Dillon, Chris Benoit, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savant, Normie Smie, Prince Tafka, Ravine, Juicy Fruit Guerrera, Daring Danny Page, Senor Goldbergo, The Dandy, and many, many more.
Jericho's heel run in WCW is greatly underplayed in the overall outlook of his career, but he was one of my all-time favorites. Unmasking Hoovy, ripping off the tuxedo of announcers. This was the guy that you loved to hate and hated to love. What made him so different than most of the heels at the time is that while the vast majority of 90s heels were all too cool for school, Jericho was more of a stuff into your locker kind of a heel. And he never half-assed it. I can't emphasize enough how much he meant to the product despite not being booked to. It was like there was a reinforced glass ceiling set in place that Jericho couldn't break entirely through, no matter how many cracks he'd make in it. He was constantly put in a position where he was given little or on some occasions almost nothing to do, but still managed to stand out from the rest. Despite being a quote-unquote smaller guy, Chris Jericho always had a larger-than-life personality.
Bobby Dunton Jr. The cowboy.
You claim to be the man of 1,000 holds, but I counted, and you know about 60, but I know 1,004, and I wrote them all down. Here we go. What are you doing here, Larry? It's Lenny Lane, and you know who I am, and you owe me $1,000.
Had Conan here, and I was right about here, pummeling him mercilessly. I had him exactly where I wanted, ladies and gentlemen.
Jericho would leave WCW, and right around the same time, a Millennium Countdown on its competitor, the WWF, would begin.
Welcome to Raw is Jericho!
Entering into the then WWF, Chris Jericho was billed as the Millennium Man, a name that would be carelessly taken by Sid Vicious of all people. His first night in the company was historic, interrupting The Rock and cutting a catchphrase-laden promo.
Hell, there's a lot of people that actually consider this the greatest or most impactful debut of all time. And Jericho didn't even have to get in the ring or take a bump. He just had to stand at the top of the ramp and do his best Popeye impression.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine why after that the company let him sit on the sidelines for several major shows until they finally put him in a feud with China.
China?
China! What is this move?
That's right. I am here. Your friend, the ambassador. The best thing going on this channel today. While V eventually is going to get to talking about China's tag team exploits with X-Pac and Evan Stone, I'm going to talk about Jericho's tag team resume. At first, he had his managerial services of Mr. Hughes. Everyone remember Mr. Hughes? Nobody? Nobody? Alright, we'll move on from Mr. Hughes.
Like that many?
Well, I'm sorry, V. I've been told we lost transmission for about 10 minutes or so. Well, anyway, before his feud with China, Jericho actually got involved with Howard Finkel, who became his manservant in Human Shield.
Which is really disgraceful, because they were clearly trying to recapture the magic of Ralphus and Jericho in WCW.
Sure, let's pretend that magic is the correct word for that angle.
Oh, here we go. And there it is, Shamrock heading out to the parking lot. Jericho's there. Shamrock, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Jericho. Oh my God, I killed Kenny.
And now for China, who would become his tag team partner, co-intercontinental champion title holder, and rival. Not in that order.
Fun fact, their rivalry on camera wasn't too different behind the scenes, as the two apparently hated working together. A match between the two would put Jericho in the doghouse after he apparently gave China a shiner. If he only waited about maybe 3 months or so, they might have given him a raise.
The China-Jericho angle, while entertaining, went on a bit longer than it probably should have, becoming a black hole that somehow engulfed Bob Holly and brought him along for the ride.
After that, Jericho received a great singles run, which included a stellar feud with Chris Benoit. Technical match after technical match, Intercontinental title, all around, ladders, submissions. Anyway, segue. Chris Benoit and Jericho started teaming up next. In a short run tag team, because sadly Benoit would get injured, but during their time, it was really interesting. They would take the belts off the two-man power trip and be a part of TLC 4.
He'd have several other notable feuds at the time, including a rivalry with Kurt Angle, and a feud with Kane over spilt coffee, and a rivalry that would center around Jericho taking a piss in William Regal's tea. Which really isn't a big deal, because I too naturally flavor all of my British friends' tea.
Excuse me, what?
The biggest tragedy here is that would be the closest William Regal ever came to tasting World Championship.
Until he finally demanded a shot and won the WWF Championship for the first time, before Triple H had it taken away from him and the history books. Why did Triple H come out with a sledgehammer? A shovel would have done fine for all these burials.
It was a great moment for fans everywhere. Until it wasn't anymore. But luckily we had his awesome on again, off again, on again, off again, almost never officially on in the first place, off again feud with The Rock.
After Benoit, Jericho went back to his singles run, and this is during the Alliance storyline. And for whatever reason, they decided to give the tag team titles to The Rock and Chris Jericho for like a weekend.
But V, I think you're forgetting what the feud actually culminated in. Jericho's first world title win, if we don't include No Mercy 2001.
Brian Zane
did the unimaginable. He refused to follow the script.
If that last part sounded a little weird to you, it's because I made a mistake and he was correcting me, so that's bad. The more you know. Welcome. I just made you smarter. Subscribe. And what a night it was for Jericho as he beat
both The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin in the same night.
Like clockwork.
Not only did he become WWF champion, but he also picked up his second WCW championship that night, unifying the titles.
And what a moment that was. Because that's all it was. Just a moment. Fleeting moment passing in time. Much like Daniel Bryan's WrestleMania win, the win itself was great, but what followed it, not so much.
The former Millennium Man's string of bad luck, and by luck I mean booking, would continue immediately after this as he became the second banana to Stephanie McMahon.
Second banana?
Hey, you wrote it!
Fair.
Jericho's run as undisputed champion was lackluster at best and downright awful at its worst. Joining him was longtime rival Stephanie, now as his manager and partner in crime. And how'd their partnership work? Well, not exactly the way you might think.
I'm a living legend, and I had to come out here in this cold and take Triple H's dog for a walk.
His title run went the way you'd expect Santino Marella winning a world title to go. It was played for laughs. Jericho, the first ever undisputed champion, the man who defeated both Rock and Austin in the same night, the people's choice, was now picking up Stephanie's dog shit. This, of course, being an obvious parallel to the time that then WWF champion Bret Hart had to artificially inseminate a cow on Superstars. I don't know if that one's on the network though, so maybe don't look for that one. Hashtag not my champion.
His lackluster championship reign was snuffed out by Triple H at WrestleMania 18, where they actually were in the main event.
Like clockwork.
Not only did he become WWF champion, but he also won the World Heavyweight Championship for the first time. His lackluster championship reign was snuffed out by Triple H at WrestleMania 18, where they actually were in the main event. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. They were in the main event.
With that time away from the world title came a few more Intercontinental Championship reigns, and notable feuds. Maybe his most notable, to internet marks at least, was his rivalry in 2003 with Goldberg. A man who didn't think enough of him to allow Jericho to put him over in 1998.
Well, eventually Jericho would put him over, but only in the ring. Despite losing his match with Goldberg at Bad Blood, he won the respect of his peers by facing him head-on in the locker room and winning.
I smell a work.
No. This happened backstage. No one in the audience saw what was going on, only the workers.
Oh, Brian, how naive you are. This was clearly all a build to a well-put-together angle.
There's literally nothing to be gained from that.
What a mark.
Though more notable on camera and in history is his rivalry with Shawn Michaels, a man who was a huge inspiration to Chris in his in-ring style. The same man he'd both aesthetically and physically emulate in the ring for many years. In a lot of ways, this was student versus mentor. You know, if the mentor never really trained the student, but hey, it sounded good on TV. HBK vs. Y2J has to go down as one of both men's greatest matches. But one of the biggest injustices in all of wrestling history is everyone talks about the matches Jericho had with Shawn Michaels, but does anyone ever talk about the match he had with Marty Jannetty?
Quickly, and he's got it on. He's got his neck bent. Boy, Marty Jannetty.
What's amazing about the storybook rivalry is that while we all thought it reached its end, we would all soon find out this was only the end of its first chapter.
Following that, Jericho once again, nice little singles run, staying in the mid-card field, and then he had a little thirst. WWE had a little thirst. They needed to wake up, so they took a big old glass of vitamin C.
I'm a 3-time tag team champion.
Well, I'm a 9-time tag team champion.
Well, you're a 9-time loser.
Well, your beard is stupid.
Him and Christian, probably one of the funniest tag teams that were ever put together. Love the both of them. You know, him and Christian were just always gold. You know, getting their clothes stolen by the Dudleys, coming out on Raw in their towels. This duo also resulted in Jericho getting another tag team title reign, which was great because I always felt they worked well together. And the eventual blow-off of this team was even better. Jericho and Christian started teaming probably near the middle of 2002, and they didn't break up until right before WrestleMania 20 in 2004. The entire time they were a team.
Jericho would keep racking up IC title and even some tag team title wins along the way, all while simultaneously making slight tweaks to his character to stay seamlessly relevant.
Jericho was a favorite with fans, but constantly booked to be despised. It wasn't until the inclusion of Trish Stratus into his friendship with Christian that he would show a love for someone other than himself. However, since this is wrestling, and wrestling is only a few homicides and funny hats away from a Shakespearean tragedy, well... Somehow during 2005, he'd find himself engaged in a rivalry with John Cena, the upcoming rebel that was going against management's image for a champion. Management being Eric Bischoff, Jericho's legitimate former employer in WCW, who genuinely didn't think he could make it to championship level. That was the same guy who was backing him in storyline here. My oh my, how times change in wrestling. Upon failing the Bish 2 times over, he was shown the door.
You son of a bitch! You're fired! What?
In actuality, this was so that he could work more with his band Fozzy and pursue other creative ventures. The man would leave for what felt like 2 decades, but in actuality were just 2 years. I guess wrestling fans are just kind of clinging.
WWE began playing Matrix-style promos, the modern Millennium Countdown, to hype his return. While they didn't explicitly say they were for the returning Ayatollah of Rock and Roll Up, come on, everyone knew.
Welcome to Raw is Jericho!
Jericho's first promo back was practically a carbon copy of his first WWF promo in August of '99. Cool the first time you heard it, but 8 years later? Pass.
Even the placement was spot on, with Orton taking the place of The Rock, and this Dancing with the Stars star taking the place of Chris Jericho. Actually, this is way before his Dancing with the Stars appearance, so he has no excuse for that vest. That's something this man had in his wardrobe. Why, Chris? Why didn't you just come out wearing a jacket with neon light? Chris, It's a bit much. It's a bit much, Chris.
The promo was almost a complete retread, minus the Popeye face. Seriously, look at that thing. He gives Robin Williams a run for his money.
Well, never mind that, folks, because Chris Jericho is back, baby! For a month. Almost immediately, Jericho could feel that he wasn't getting over as expected. I mean, his return should have been something huge, you know, like something monumental, like Hogan joining the NWO. Instead, it kind of played off like, well, Hogan first joining WCW.
In 2008, after refereeing a match where he felt manipulated by friend and mentor Shawn Michaels, Jericho shocked the world when he turned heel. Now you might be saying, Brian, what's the big shock? Jericho's been a heel plenty of times before. Well, sure, but not like this.
I am the best in the world at what I do. I am the best in the world at what I do. I am the best in the world at what I do. I am the best in the world at what I do. I am the best in the world at what I do.
Gone were the funny catchphrases, the goofy hair and the long tights, and in its place was a cold, calculating, self-righteous egotist in his underwear.
Fans couldn't help but boo him and stare at his thighs. Angrily. Look at those things. It was an odd time to be a wrestling fan.
Jericho and Michaels would begin a feud that made their other classic fairy tale rivalry seem like a child's pop-up book. You take the chemistry, the connection, and combat from their first run, then you combine it with the hatred these two had for each other, and the pure brutality this war would see them put each other through, and you have a reason to strip CM Punk of his world championship. What?
The rivalry highlighted the attributes of both men as they complemented each other perfectly when they worked together. I mean, kind of like me and Brian.
Thanks, kid. You're still not coming on my channel.
Jericho beats Shawn Michaels with the help of Lance Cade, because Lance Cade was trained by Shawn Michaels.
So Jericho, the man who was once the protege of Shawn Michaels, but not really, aligned himself with the man who was actually the protege of Shawn Michaels, but not really. But differently, not really. It's unfortunate that this pairing didn't last longer, as there was potential in Jericho having a protege in name only and a stooge in reality. I wish there was more to talk about here, but Lance's short tenure in the company doesn't afford us that much time.
Come WrestleMania season, Chris found himself out of the title picture. Now think back to WrestleMania 25. The movie The Wrestler was getting serious Oscar buzz. Over Vern Gagne's dead body?
Because of all the Oscar buzz, WWE saw dollar signs and decided to bring in the wrestler's star, Mickey Rourke. Mickey and Jericho made a couple offhand comments about each other, obviously attempting to set up some sort of angle. But it was that same Oscar buzz that made Mickey pull out of the project because his agents instilled the fear that having a wrestling match might affect his chance at an Oscar. So now in hindsight, he has neither.
The power of hindsight. Creative's one weakness. During their confrontation on Larry King Live, Rourke apparently thought that Jericho was tearing into him for real, which I find interesting since Rourke is an actor by trade.
The Legends House of Ricky Steamboat, Jimmy Snuka, and Roddy Piper were deemed a proper replacement in a 3-on-1 match, which still to this day may just go down as the oddest match in WrestleMania history.
While Piper and Snuka didn't really impress, RIP, Steamboat and Jericho stole the show, well, their portion of it anyway. The two would have a rematch at that year's Backlash, and while it wasn't the performance they gave at Mania, it was still a million times better than the performance Piper and Snuka gave. Once again, RIP.
After completing his second coming of Randy Orton's Legend Killer gimmick, he'd moved back into the tag team division.
Before shortly teaming with Edge, that went nowhere because Edge got Achilles heels injuries.
Out of partners and out of luck, Jericho enlisted the help of the world's largest athlete, Big Show. And the WWE Universe let out a collective sigh of, really? But to the shock of just about everyone, the team of Jericho was a recipe for success. Not only did the pairing work, but it far surpassed any and all expectation.
Jericho held the unified tag team titles and dominated the tag team division, feuding with the reunited DX, who, ironically enough, were composed of two people Chris had some of his most notable feuds with. Show and Jericho had such great chemistry that you'd be forgiven for thinking that they worked together more often than they had. The gimmick even managed to breathe new creative life into the Big Show, who many felt was meandering aimlessly around this point. Show was revitalized with purpose as Chris Jericho's credible henchman. He wasn't playing the great big dope, but instead a violent take-no-bullshit enforcer who knew and accepted his place.
Jericho were involved in a triple threat match with The Undertaker over the world title at Survivor Series 2009, which gave birth to the single greatest comeback in wrestling history.
Go back to Toronto! I'm from Winnipeg, you idiot!
I'm from Winnipeg, you idiot.
How cute.
The team didn't have great longevity, but they did at least provide us with memorable moments and matches.
The Unified Tag Team Championships had them on separate brands, and the minute that they lost the belts, Jericho was forced to stay on SmackDown while Big Show was a Raw superstar. Conversely, Big Show would then start his own team with The Miz, called Show Miz, that was on Raw, and when they lost the belts, Jericho had at that point been drafted to Raw. The ex-partners of the Big Show, Jericho and Miz, decided to put their own little team together for about a couple of weeks.
Jericho left the company again in 2010 to pursue his career with Fozzy, but he did come back in early 2011. He wasn't loud and brash, nor was he dark and serious. Introducing Chris the Mute. His vignette said that the world as we knew it would end at the Rumble, but considering how long guys like John Cena and Sheamus have been around since then, clearly he whiffed on that one. Jericho eventually started talking again, pretty much reverting back to his old serious ways. But now instead of acting dark and self-righteous, he became more of a complainer because everyone was stealing his material.
Now he knows how I feel when Brian uploads a video about someone I was going to do a video on.
How am I supposed to know?
Shh! You know what you did. You know what you did.
Jericho's return centered around a rivalry with WWE Champion CM Punk, which would see the two self-proclaimed best in the world go head-to-head, during which they would have a WrestleMania Classic and an all-out brawl on the following pay-per-view Extreme Rules. Now, as for why Jericho was attempting to goat the public into believing that a man who was known for being the straight-edge superstar was actually an alcoholic, well, that's really up for anyone's guess. I guess that's just creative interpretation. But this rivalry would be noteworthy for Jericho's invention of the alcoholic slip and slide.
Come on, punk! I'm the best in the world at what I do.
Jericho would leave and return the company multiple times over the last few years, each return having a little less oomph than the last. But 2016 was definitely his year, especially after he began teaming with Kevin Owens.
I know what you really want, and I'm going to give it to you. Tonight, I give you the gift of Jericho. Drink it in, man.
What might be the biggest irony here is that fans actually loathed when he played second fiddle.
Second fiddle?
Yeah, I wrote it. Fans hated when he played second fiddle with Stephanie McMahon, but loved seeing a subservient Chris Jericho to Kevin Owens. The two of them would spend most of their days boasting about their friendship and each other's in-ring abilities and careers. It reminded me of a modern Piper and Orton.
Here's a brief list of things Jericho got over during this run. Scarves, It, Stupid Idiot, clipboards, and, well, lists.
You just made the list!
Oh no! Oh, here we go.
That's a stupid decision that can only be made by a stupid idiot.
That's why it's dry, you stupid idiot.
Stupid idiot.
I think it's a history bump. $15,000, Ambrose! You idiot!
Expecting me, little idiots! Idiots!
It was a bizarre hybrid of the irreverent character he'd portrayed in WCW and his more serious character in 08, and it worked surprisingly well. Before this, I'd begun to have my doubts about Jericho as a character, but just like in 2008, he surprised me yet again.
Well, then there's the modern Chris Jericho.
I am the greatest of all time. I am the alpha of this business. And I'm gonna prove it.
The Chris Jericho that's dishing out code breakers as if they were stone cold stunners. The scarf-wearing alpha male who assaults ring crew and young boys alike is an incarnation that needs to be seen to truly be believed.
I'm not sure why Jericho was so mad at Kenny Omega considering they never met before, but the anger did feel real.
Bitch.
And it really helped play up into their match at Wrestle Kingdom 12. They tore the house down in that match and was one of the best matches of the entire night. And from the looks of things, his run in New Japan is far from over.
I remember Bret Hart once saying that he wore the color pink to humiliate his opponents. Imagine being the guy who got his ass beat by the guy wearing pink. Well, imagine being the professional athlete who got your ass kicked by a man wearing a woman's headband.
You can call him the best in the world, you can call him the greatest of all time, and many have. But I'd call Chris Jericho the Madonna of professional wrestling. Being able to spend decades at the top, constantly reinventing himself at a consistent success rate, managing to not only stay relevant, but redefine the word's meaning.
And I made the joke earlier, but I'll be honest with you, I actually really dig Fozzy.
I must admit, I've never heard much of Jericho's work with Fozzy, but I will say, their self-titled debut album, seriously underrated. Well, V, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Well, not for me, but for some people watching, I'm sure.
I personally can't believe we've covered this much ground and managed to not bring up Moon Goose McQueen.
Yeah, Wait, what?
What? Roll credits.
Social justice warrior videos take a fair amount of time, effort, patience, and talent. And V has none of these things. So help this poor bald fuck out and join the crusade against stupidity by joining our Patreon.
Oh! Hey! Hey! What's going on over there? V? Brian? I see you! I see you both! Oh, what's the matter? Neither one of you have any love for your boy, your good, close, personal friend, the Spartan swinger, Brian Carlucci Danovich? I mean, has your memory lapsed for both of you? Well, mine hasn't. I mean, I have the memory of an elephant, and the trunk of one too. But anyway, not only am I a proud new member of the SIJW live channel, but I'm also an alumnus. I mean, Wrestling with Regret channel, Brian, I was your best guest star in the history of the channel. And now the two of you are going to do this video collaboration together without me in my nice black formal Sunday best. I mean, this is a terrible decision. Who could make a terrible decision like this? It must have been a bunch of complete, stupid, moronic idiots.
I'm worried about shrinkage.